Find out how unconventional allies can work to strengthen accountability and financing for development and sustainable investment in this session about the far-reaching potential of private sector actions.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where the world you're dialing in from. Welcome to the SDG Action Zone session. My name is Pratik Desai. I'm the Strategic Engagement Lead at the World Benchmarking Alliance, and I'm also the moderator for today's conversation. Our session today is titled Alliances for Impact, Unconventional Partnerships. And as the title says, we'll be focusing on partnership and collaboration, especially with business, and what this means in the context of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We have a fantastic panel with us today who are dialing in from all over the world, from New York to London to Nairobi to New Delhi, to share their insights. And so we're really looking forward to hearing from them in just a couple of minutes. But to first provide some context on today's session, many of you will have heard before the spiel about partnerships in the private sector, particularly if you've been part of UN conversations before. From the staggering figures around the SDG financing gap to the data around economic opportunities that are awaiting businesses that embrace the goals as part of their core business. You'll also probably have heard about the needs for business to be more creative and ambitious in meeting the needs of the current moment. COVID-19 has highlighted the fragility of our global economic system, with supply chains thrown into chaos, millions unemployed or pushed into poverty, and interconnected issues like climate change and inequality exacerbated to levels that we really haven't seen before in our lifetimes. What you may have heard a little bit less about, though, is what and how companies are actually doing in rising to this challenge, and how different stakeholder groups, whether they're investors or civil society organizations, or the media or government or consumers and young people, are influencing companies to behave differently and to drive meaningful change for people and the planet. That's why at the World Benchmarking Alliance, we're building a movement to measure and incentivize business impact towards a sustainable future, that works for everyone. We're doing this through developing free, publicly available benchmarks that assess and rank the world's 2,000 most influential companies on their contributions to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Our work centers on the idea that inclusive, multi-stakeholder, and indeed unconventional partnerships are the secret sauce to creating the type of world that we want to see. And that in order to actually be most effective in what's already a crowded space, we need to work in new ways that fundamentally transform entire systems. And it's for this reason that at our heart, we're an alliance. We have now currently more than 150 organizations that make up our alliance, spanning a range of geographic regions, sectors, industries, and community voices. And in that way, we're really echoing the spirit of SDG 17 itself, Partnership for the Goals, and working collectively to ensure a more just, inclusive, and sustainable future. In the process, we're also pushing for transparency. We're pushing for accountability. We're pushing for impact for the people and communities that are most in need. And I'm thrilled that our panel today reflects the richness and diversity of the Alliance. And I'm looking forward to hopefully a really dynamic conversation that highlights solutions, makes connections, and considers how we can build forward rather than build back better. So with that said, I'd love to turn over to our panel. We have a tight 45 minutes, so we'll try to keep it moving as quickly as possible. I'll move over to our first panelist, Arindom Datta, Executive Director for Rural and Development Banking and Advisory with Rabobank. Arindom, thanks so much for joining us. I know it's late for you in India. When hearing your title, most people wouldn't necessarily make a natural connection between banking, rural farmers, and so wondering if you can maybe speak a little bit to how you're working at Rabobank with rural and local communities, especially around transforming the food system, and why is this important now, especially in the context of COVID-19?
Thanks, Pratik. Thanks for inviting me. Now, farmers need credit for the business, and we as Rabobank, the world's leading and largest food and agribusiness bank, we provide credit to them. But for farmers, credit is a necessary condition. It's not a sufficient condition. And that's where SDG 17 kicks in. It's critical because farmer needs advisory, needs access to markets, needs climate solutions, they need food loss solutions. So that's where a bank needs to collaborate with different stakeholders to ensure that all the necessary wherewithal is available with the farmers to be able to do his or her business in a profitable manner. Now, as a financial institution, we not only provide financial institutions, but we not only provide financial solutions, but we also provide networks and knowledge. Just to give you an example, as a response to the COVID situation, where the risk perception in the market is extremely high, and most of the financial institutions have stopped lending to most sectors. We have aligned with DFC, that's the guarantee arm of government of US, with two of the largest foundations based out of Europe and three of the leading impact funds in India to create a COVID response fund for agri-transition. The end use for this, one is digitization, which is extremely critical in today's world. Second is solutions for food loss, and third is clean energy solutions at the smallholder level. Now, why I'm mentioning this particular structure is because there's collaboration at two levels. First is across continents. We have the US government, the guarantee arm that's based out of North America. We have two of the largest foundations that's representing the development sector from Europe, and we have three financial institutions in India which are trying together to solve the problem of smallholder farmers in India. It's a big problem. There are about 140 million smallholder farmers in India, of which more than 85% have less than 2 hectares of land. On the other level, it's the collaboration between the private sector, that's the finance companies in India, the development sector, the foundations in Europe, and the government in US. And to stitch it all together is where creativity is required, and that's where the SDG 17 becomes absolutely critical. This is a program of 55 million, but this is not going to be the first of its kind. And we hope that this sets the trend for other players also to crowd in and to build up such solutions which are meaningful, which can apply at scale and solve a real world problem. Thank you, Pratik.
Great, thank you so much, Arindom, and really great to hear about the work that you're doing in Rabobank, and especially I think the focus on using partnerships to advocate for networks and knowledge, which is really powerful. Next, I'd love to turn it over to Andia Chakava, the country chair for New Faces, New Voices, Kenya. Andia, thanks for joining us. This is a particularly important year for SDG progress as we reflect on the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Conference on Women. Can you speak to the significance of women's financial inclusion and economic empowerment and some of the lessons that you've learned through your work at New Faces, New Voices Kenya around what collaboration in this space looks like?
Thank you for that. At New Faces, New Voices Kenya, we basically work to support women in 3 ways. One of them is to just improve the leadership of women, just make sure that they are in positions of power and influence and increase their visibility. We also work to support, provide technical assistance to women, whether it is women in both their professional fields or whether they're entrepreneurs. And we also work really hard to put capital in the hands of women. And we do this mainly because we see that there's a lot of activities that are happening in the economy, but women are not necessarily getting their fair share. Whether we're talking about their spending power, but not necessarily seeing those decisions being reflected in how products themselves are designed or how those companies themselves are represented, really does not demonstrate the diversity of women. We also have the issue of treating women as if they're homogeneous and not recognizing the difference between grassroots women may have different needs, women that operate within the informal economy as well, and really looking at how those needs even translate from somebody being an adolescent girl and going into adulthood, and the mentors that they see that allow them to know that they can achieve these particular things. We've spent a lot of time lately really focusing on women entrepreneurs, which we find has really been undervalued in a lot of ways. Women are in business. In fact, women in Africa are the ones that actually choose to be in business more than their male counterparts. But you find that their businesses tend to be smaller than male-founded businesses, and this has a lot to do with just the amount of capital that is available to them, and institutions actually being more deliberate to seek out and source women. And what we do at New Faces is that we have a network of women in finance, and networks, I would like to add, are really great ways of really bringing collaboration together, because a network is a function of people that come from different backgrounds, different institutions, but you come together on a shared interest and goal, and you basically pool your knowledge and your contacts together in order to move the needle forward. So we found that through this network, we've been able to, whether it is partner with the Nairobi Securities Exchange to improve the number of women that are on boards, whether we've been able to partner with local financial institutions that are seeking, and I'd like to add that we're seeing a greater effort by the private sector to actually work with women organizations to actually find women to build that trust and relationship building. So we also co-host and co-implement technical assistance programs for various aspects. We did that in light of COVID, and we also find ourselves working with the government because sometimes, and it's not only the Ministry of Gender as we would think of it, but if we look at what an outcome, an unintended consequence of COVID, like gender-based violence, where you need to also interface between the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Health. So we find that we build women's agency, and we really work towards influencing people's perceptions and making people have more empathy and understanding on what it does to actually bring women into the fold. And we also help increase women's confidence to raise their hands, so that we're increasing to see some funds that are dedicated, that really are going out to attract women. And we want to make sure that women themselves are prepared and are willing and are open to some of the initiatives that are coming that are targeted at them.
Great. That's quite an impressive description of the work that you're doing, Andia, and really love what you said about representation and making sure that we're not treating women as one homogenous group and really thinking about the diversity of their experiences. So thank you for that. Next up, Madeep Tiwana, the Chief Programs Officer for Civicus, the World Alliance for Citizen Participation. Madeep, great to see you again. Civil society, of course, has an enormous role to play in helping to drive accountability on the SDGs. I know Civicus has been doing some thinking about what this means for the private sector as well. How can civil society work in partnership with business to translate societal expectations into responsible business conduct in a way that protects people and planet?
Thanks so much, Pratik, and thank you very much for hosting this important conversation. So, if you look at this issue, I think what we really need to look at is that genuine issue-based partnerships between civil society, government, business, and academia and others can actually really help us unlock the potential of Agenda 2030. It really is a groundbreaking, and I would say arguably the most ambitious agenda ever undertaken as humanity, itself, and it's really, really comprehensive. Now, civil society and business share common interests, and if you just take three, illustrative examples of the SDGs, we look at peace, justice, and strong institutions, or we look at gender justice, which Andia has just spoken about, or we look at sustainable production and consumption. In each of these three things, there are certain common aims that business and civil society have. Business, for example, wants rule of law. It allows business to have a stable political climate to be able to conduct its operations. It helps in reducing corruption. Civil society has an interest in ensuring that constitutional values are upheld, that international law, international standards are observed. Similarly, with gender justice, civil society again seeks to promote gender justice as an end in itself. Business has a long-term interest in gender justice because it helps to create more fairer societies, it helps to create more educated societies, it also helps to get a better workforce looking at the future. And with regards to sustainable development and consumption, we live in a consumer-oriented society. We live in a society where people have a lot more information that's available to them. We have a huge cohort of young people, which is going to get bigger in time, who will be watching the activities of businesses in a true consumer-driven society. So, and civil society, of course, has an interest in sustainable society. So, in all of these three things, if you look at, civil society can actually provide a lot of technical expertise to businesses that are looking to improve their corporate social responsibility activities, businesses that are looking to be responsible citizens. Civil society can help them take them through the technical aspects, as well as also help businesses understand what the needs of the communities on the ground are. Some of these needs cannot be fully understood very easily from normal mainstream marketing institutes and others, because they may involve the needs of people who are being at danger of being left behind, because the real important part of the SDG agenda is to ensure I'm sorry, that's my daughter, and I've not been able to stop her from coming, but that's just part of what happens in these situations. So the needs of populations who are at most at risk of being left behind, civil society can help them provide an understanding of that. Conversely, we are living in an age of authoritarian populism and a resurgence of old school authoritarianism, where the people's ability, particularly those who are excluded, their ability to shape the decisions around them are being challenged. According to our research at Civicus, only 3% of the world's population live in countries where the freedoms of expression, association, and peaceful assembly are adequately protected in line with constitutional standards, in line with international law standards. Now, the businesses have a lot of power. They have a lot of power over the political executive. In some instances, some businesses have actually greater revenues than some states. And here, businesses can play an important role in being champions of democratic values. They can play an important role in calling out leaders, whether publicly or whether behind the scenes. We are living in an age where racial justice is again become, the fault lines of our societies are being bubbling forth due to racial injustices. Businesses can play an important role by being ahead of the curve, by being more open, more diverse, by being more sensitive to the needs and the aspirations of those who are not counted in regular political decision making. So there, I would really say that as responsible citizens, as catalysts of development and inclusiveness, businesses and business leaders can certainly play a very, very important role in working with civil society. But for that, we really need genuine issue-based partnerships. And those partnerships really need to be focused around the issue, the need itself. If we bring in extraneous considerations, then the partnership tends to get contaminated, and which I can speak to later.
Great, thank you so much, Madeep. And I think really important point that you made around the way that civil society can help to hold businesses accountable in championing some of these issues that otherwise might go unhandled. And great to see your daughter as well. I think it's a great transition actually to Raina. Raina Kadavil, the Global Marketing Analyst at Mastercard and Communications Director for the Westchester chapter at the UN Association of the USA. Raina, Madeep raised an interesting point about the role of young people, especially as we've seen recently, in really being on the front lines of setting the bar for companies in terms of consumer expectations. Could you talk a little bit about your work advancing the SDGs as part of UNA USA, and what role you see young people playing in driving accountability on these issues?
Absolutely. Thank you, Pratik, and it's great to be here. So, the reason that I think young people are so important and so great in this role is that we often have the resources, the time, and most importantly, the energy, this unapologetic energy to not stand by when we see an issue that concerns us, but overwhelmingly to speak up and create a nonprofit, start a protest, write a book, do the research, or at least tweet about it. All of the above have been tools that in my work I've found really effective personally. And for me, SDG action has always been about elevating voiceless communities and engaging people through technology. And I think that latter especially is something that young people often connect to. The causes I focused on and the tools I used have evolved over the years, but it really came about with starting somewhere. And so when I was 10, I co-founded an organization that revolved around React News, a youth-made news program that educated young people about the SDGs while giving them marketable skills that they could go on and use on their resume. And we worked closely with SDG number 6 as well, building freshwater facilities in Kenya and volunteering locally. That transitioned into today, I'm the CEO of Urban Refuge, which is a nonprofit where we're building out an app actually to connect refugees and migrants living in large cities around the world with local aid resources, which again, coming back to that business and nonprofit partnership, and that addresses a few SDGs, 1, 3, 8, and 10. So one of my favorite roles, though, as you mentioned, at the moment is with the United Nations Association of Westchester, and I'm working with them to revamp our Model United Nations conference, actually, to get middle and high schoolers involved in engaging and getting educated on these issues, especially during COVID-19, because it's so important that kids do have these conversations, learn about these issues, and become passionate about them from a young age. And it's no secret that millennials and Gen Zers have higher expectations for the businesses that we patronize. And that's not just about two-day shipping and digital service and all of that. There's actually a huge part of that that really focuses on being aware of and selective about the companies that are truly doing well by doing good, and holding accountable the companies that are doing well through, unsavory labor practices or environmental degradation. And it's not just about those businesses that we shop at or eat at. It also comes down to where we choose to use our talents. And so when I was job hunting a year and a half ago at the end of my undergrad degree, I was really passionate about applying to this company that I work at now, Mastercard, because I saw the impact that they were making and continuing to make as a partner with nonprofits, with UN organizations, with Black Lives Matter and COVID-19, how quickly they've mobilized, the work they're doing around financial inclusion. And I see a lot of my friends and peers looking for those priorities in the places that they're applying to and working for as well. And with young people, another point is that we really can seek out and take advantage of the corporate wealth that businesses are willing to invest in us as well, like with the Coca-Cola Scholar Foundation, where every one of us is addressing an SDG in some form. There is still a lot of accountability work to be done, we know, but it's really incredible to see that companies are increasingly offering young people a voice and trying to engage with the causes that do deserve attention in the world. And we do see young people putting pressure on them to care about and invest in causes that a few years ago would not have been mainstream the way they are today. And through social media and marching and the selectivity that I talked about, I really believe that young people are setting the world's activist agenda today.
That's great. Wow, thank you, Raina. And I love that last line that young people are setting the world's activist agenda. And agreed that I think that the unapologetic energy that you mentioned, I think is something that we're seeing really in full force nowadays as the world is sort of balancing a convergence of crises in all parts of the world. So thank you for that. Last but not least, we'd love to turn to Giulia Corinaldi, the Director of Inclusive Economies at the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Giulia, thanks for being here. We've heard a couple of times already in the conversation about elevating the voices from those most marginalized, whether that's young people or women or rural farmers. Can you tell us a little bit more about Thomson Reuters Foundation's work connecting people and ideas through storytelling? And how can we break down silos and bring together voices from uncommon backgrounds to tell those stories that too often go unheard?
Thank you, Pratik, and I'm thrilled to be here. And of course, our strength in storytelling is through Thomson Reuters Foundation Global News team. We have almost 50 journalists around the world and 300 freelancers covering the new frontier of human rights. from reporting on slavery in supply chains to the human impact of climate change to issues affecting LGBT community and women. We highlight the lives of the billion of people around the world who struggle to live freely and are unable to live fairly. But how we really bring together voices from uncommon backgrounds is through the combined power of journalism and the law. We use both to build global awareness of critical issues faced by humanity, inspire collective leadership, and help shape a prosperous world where no one is left behind. So in one hand, accurate and balanced news coverage is critical to inform the public, revealing previously undocumented stories, exposing abuse of power, and holding authority to account. The law, on the other hand, is fundamental to establishing and protecting the rights of individuals and to uphold free, fair, and informed societies. We use these two expertise specifically to advance media freedom, foster inclusive economies, and promote human rights. To foster inclusive economy, we aim of combating modern slavery, fostering fair, sustainable economic model, and raising awareness of the impact on technology, on people, society, and freedom. So I wanted to focus on modern slavery and how we amplify the message and to tell storytelling and collaborate to deliver impact. So we have about 9 journalists dedicated in reporting on modern slavery, which allows them to focus on investigative journalism that can truly lead to change. Last year, for example, we exposed Indian factories by finding they were endangering seamstresses' health with illegal pills last summer. Our article was circulated widely thanks to the Reuters wire, and the central government and Tamil Nadu state official started investigating and inspected over 100 factories through labor officials. And so this is how we amplify the story, and that which leads to change. But we also train local journalists on how to do storytelling on slavery. We train journalists in over 20 countries to strengthen local storytelling. And the other component is we help develop pro bono legal research for NGO, which in many cases has helped push for legal reform, such as the one with Vasayana Foundation. Thanks to the comparative research that we did with Vasayana Foundation, they were able to push and support the Department of Labor and Employment in the Philippines in releasing the first rules and regulation governing the working and living condition of fishermen, which helped thousands of workers across access their rights. So at the foundation, at the Thomson Reuters Foundation, we believe it's through collaboration and by using the power of the law and the media that we can amplify the unheard story and ensure not only that they're heard, but they lead to impact and help change laws and regulation, which aim to protect the rights of many peoples.
Thank you so much, Giulia. And I love that double focus on telling the stories, but then also using that amplification and that media and that engagement to then push for the legislative change that you need. That's really powerful. Thank you all for that first round of really impressive and inspiring remarks. We're in the SDG Action Zone, so let's talk about some solutions. Many of you have already highlighted some of the incredible work that you're doing as part of your individual organizations. But if I were to ask each of you for one practical solution or learning around partnership or collaboration that can be scaled to help supercharge business engagement and accountability on the SDGs, what would that be? So looking for real concrete solutions, no SDG watching, no corporate philanthropy, although that's great, but really genuine actions we can take so that we ensure that we don't only, as I said earlier, build back better, but really look forward to building a new future that doesn't get us back to where we were. Let's maybe go backwards this time. So Giulia, we'll start with you. Okay, great, thank you. And our work with the private sector addresses a number of SDG, but we have a particular focus on SDG 8 to tackle modern slavery. And
we have an annual initiative, the Stop Slavery Award, which encourages companies to showcase how they are leading in best practices to mitigate the risk of modern slavery through their supply chains and their business practices. So we have several different categories now that range from enterprise for goods, services, SMEs, campaign, collaboration, impact, innovation, media, so that we can showcase both how both businesses are putting in place the right policy and practices, as well as showcasing collaboration between NGOs, the media, and businesses. And through the Stop Slavery Award, we have also brought companies together at roundtable to share the challenges and best practice. We believe that progress can only be made through this type of collaboration, with companies willing to work together to address issues in their businesses, such the one of human rights and supply chains. And we encourage more companies to apply, but the reason it is because the application in itself is an incredible tool for companies to benchmark their policy and procedure they have in place to address modern slavery. And this isn't easy scalable. More and more companies can use that to understand where are they in their policy development to address modern slavery. And then I think it's very important for business to be part of a wider conversation. And through our convenings, we really create the opportunity to create opportunity for collaboration. They can address together a common challenge and not in silos, which is often what happens.
Thank you, Giulia. Raina, over to you. I think you might be on mute. There we go.
Speaking from a young person's point of view, and hopefully to the young people that are listening, I would say that in terms of taking action on the SDGs, to find the SDG that you're passionate about, the one that, you know, gets your blood boiling, and throw your everything into that. There is no one solution to the SDGs, of course. In my own work, I've seen 100 different ways of responding and reacting to the refugee crisis, but every individual solution, you know, seeds the others. I challenge you to be as empathetic as you can and as unrelenting as you can in developing your solution. And I encourage you to get businesses, large and small, involved, whether it's for funding, publicity, technology, mentorship. Reach out to them and hold those who have the resources accountable to do more than the bare minimum. And the marketer in me says that it's all about how you tell your story. Create a compelling story around why your chosen SDG matters and what your solution is. And you will find that businesses will be willing to listen and support real solutions. Do not be shy, you know, to say, yes, Black lives matter and migrants deserve rights and the planet is burning. The perfect example for me is with Urban Refuge. The founders reached out for help initially in developing our app, and Microsoft actually stepped in to create a prototype for us because they were inspired by the story that we told. And even though there is often this huge emphasis placed on focusing activism where things are most dire in the world, I think for young people and for anyone, you might be surprised to find that there's actually a huge need for the SDGs in your own communities, and there's a huge opportunity for impact there as well. And the more connected and hands-on you can be with the communities that you're trying to help, the more meaningful the impact is and the more sustainable it will be, most importantly. And I also just want to add that if you don't have that solution in mind just yet, that's okay too. If there are 1.2 billion young people on this planet, then there are 1.2 billion solutions out there for us to engage in SDG action. Do it through your art, through your music, through, you know, raising your voice on the street, by voting, by running for office. Do it all because you're not too young, no matter how young you are. And engage with other thoughtfully concerned young people too, because half the battle is raising awareness and education and inspiration. Long before I was running nonprofits or working with the UN, I was writing my first book just because I loved writing and I wanted to get my voice out there. And that was all about fiction, about young women raising their voices to fire a revolution. And my book did not start a revolution, but hearing how some young girls in real life reacted to it fired me up to start my nonprofits and demonstrations and advocacy groups. So even if you don't know what your big solution is yet, I want you to start somewhere like I did, because I didn't know what I was getting myself into then. I was, you know, just writing, just getting a group of friends together around something I cared about, but it seeded everything that I've done since.
That's awesome. Great. Thank you, Raina. Madeep, over to you.
So Pratik, I'd spoken a little bit about the crisis of civic freedoms, in previously, and it's really a big challenge because under the SDGs, we have a commitment to fundamental freedoms. We also have a commitment to inclusive, responsive, and participatory decision making. Yet we have this global challenge where people are unable to be part of the decisions that impact their lives. So my big solution probably here would be that, given the interest of the private sector to be involved in the sustainable development goals, and given the fact that participation and accountability are so central to achieving the SDGs, and we are going to be going into this decade of accountability, that perhaps we set up a group of champions of civic freedoms, which could involve business leaders, could involve some civil society leaders, and it could involve some political leaders. And these champions of civic freedoms, sort of act as, as the ambassadors for, these universal democratic values. We are celebrating 75 years of the UN this year, and the UN Charter begins with the words "We the peoples," and it has important commitments to protecting fundamental human rights and and ensuring justice and rule of law. So that's what I would probably, as an innovative idea, I'd like to to propose this, and perhaps maybe our friends who are here, maybe they can take it back to their to their companies, and maybe you could work with others in the World Benchmarking Alliance membership. I did want to just reflect a little bit more on some of the issues that we're talking about. Oftentimes what happens is that with partnerships, we really have to look at our partnership or our involvement in the SDGs from why we are involving ourselves in that. So and that perhaps needs to come from being responsible citizens. As a civil society organization, I could say, our involvement is to support the mission, the vision of the SDGs. It cannot become a vehicle for greater sustainability of fundraising for us. Similarly, I would say in corporate partnerships, it cannot become a marketing tool, and oftentimes, the SDG work cannot, it ends up being linked to marketing and, budgets, right? Or corporate social responsibility oftentimes ends being linked to marketing. And that in itself, I would say, sort of undermines the very essence of corporate social responsibility. And then, my pledge would be that if companies genuinely want to, to exercise corporate social responsibility, then we don't need to make a big hue and cry about it. But let's work with civil society. Let's work and work, both within our institutions to make them more just, more inclusive, more sustainable, and then of course that can translate in the external sphere.
Great, thank you, Madeep. That was great, and I love the idea of a group of champions of civic freedom. So yeah, definitely something to take forward after this session. Andia, over to you next.
Yeah, so because of our passion in just supporting women in business and just trying to get people not to see them as an other, or these are people that actually just deserve grants, or they're part of it's a real business solution. When we did our research, I mean, the two basic barriers for women in business growing is access to finance and access to markets. Now, we continue to spend a lot of time in access to finance, but I really want to focus my partnership discussion around access to markets. There's been less scrutiny about some of the largest companies in the world and what happens within the supply chains. There's hardly any gender even disaggregated data that just demonstrates just how those supply chains can actually be broadened to include a lot more people and actually to create the market that women need. So we focused a lot on representation. People go and they like to get the women on boards, and we're still doing dismal about on that across the board. But it is more sort of politically correct to have that, but you can still have a toxic culture internally that has women still leave at the middle management level, and you can still have areas where your company doesn't really do outreach to smaller businesses. In fact, there are companies that we have engaged that many smaller businesses can't simply get those opportunities simply because the threshold is too high. You have to have so much capital up front. And there are ways to sort of break some of that chain by, linking up with financial institutions, allowing smaller and younger businesses. Otherwise, we're saying young people will never get a shot, and the same people will keep getting the work. So I think access to markets is one way of really integrating and driving the partnerships that are needed to it. Another thing with the partnerships that I wanted to say is that we are used to collaborating with people that think like us, that believe in the same thing as us. But what we've seen as we try and push our agenda, we've had to be friendly to people that are they haven't drank the Kool-Aid. So they don't necessarily think the same way that we do, but that's the only way that we're going to make real change. So to me, it's let's get unlikely partnerships. And when we're finding that people ask us to work with them at New Faces, it's people that are really struggling. They're probably maybe the worst when it comes to gender, and they really want a group to support them. And initially would have been like, well, why do we want to be affiliated with them? But we've seen that we're actually bringing in the knowledge and expertise. And another thing I wanted to add with partnerships, we've done a lot of research, but we find sometimes whoever says it, sometimes it depends on who listens. And we found that we've ended up using sort of media influencers, people that have a large social media following, and giving them the message and say, hey, can you say this? Because sometimes with politicians, it backfires depending on what is happening with the sentiments in the country. So just getting everybody to really push the access to markets and getting that transparency on just how much of that money is going to small and medium enterprises, and really pushing the unlikely partnerships with people that may not really think like us, and then going further and saying who are the right people to amplify those results by giving them the tools that they need that they can influence other people more.
Great, thank you so much, Andia. That was great, and I think the focus on unlikely partnerships and engaging with those who think differently, I think, is a really important point that we can actually probably apply to other than the SDGs. But when it comes to the SDGs, I think if we're talking about systems change, that's really critical. So thanks for that. Arindom, we'll turn it over to you next.
Thanks. So the critical piece here is for the private sector. It's transparency and accountability. And that is something which the customers, the consumers, and the clients need to demand from the private sector and from the businesses. And the businesses need to be made to make very clear to its internal and external stakeholders as to what they stand for, report on the business they are doing, and be accountable for what they are doing. That's one. Second is, when we are talking of collaboration, it's extremely important that no single sector, whether it's the civil society or it's a private sector or the government, that they know it all. You need to work together. It's not about us and them. It's about growing a better world together. That's extremely important. We have to co-create solutions. And third is a related point of communication between the three large sectors, the private sector, the civil society, and the government. And that remains the weak link, because there's a lot of mistrust, distrust, because we don't see the movement of human resources and talent from one sector to other sectors seamlessly. That needs to happen. And that's a message for the younger generation. Of the best among the three and see to it that they merge together or they work together towards common goal. And the last point is on the power of digital technology. It's only through digitization and technology that you can, go through the process of transformation, go through the process of ensuring accountability. If the world is full of information asymmetry, for us to achieve the SDG goal, the communication needs to be clear. The correct information needs to be there, and information needs to be actionable. And that's where digital technology plays a mega role. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Arindom. And I think a really important point about the fact that we're all in this together, and that if we're really going to advance progress on this agenda, then we're not going to be able to do it in silos. There was a lot there, a lot of really, really great points, and I think really interesting as well, and great that we had perspectives from so many different sectors. So business, civil society, young people, the media, so really helpful. I think some of the things that I heard the most, the importance of leadership and sharing of best practices, finding things that you're passionate about, being empathetic in your advocacy, but also being unrelenting and holding people's feet to the fire for performance. I think being really intentional about partnerships and focusing on impact. That includes when we're talking about access to finance and access to markets, thinking about the full value chains and engaging people that might be different to really drive that amplification and that accountability. And then, as Arindom said, really being sure that we're communicating across sectors, between sectors, within sectors, to make sure that we're echoing the demand from stakeholders and really driving business engagement on these issues. So that was a really rich conversation. Thank you all. Hopefully I did an okay job wrapping it all up. But as we move forward to our last couple of minutes, I'd like us to look ahead a little bit. So as you all know, this Anga, we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the UN. And as Madeep rightly pointed out, the preamble to the charter starts off, "We the peoples." And so based on the conversation that we had today, if everyone could maybe tell us in a few words, what kind of world do you all want to see in 2045 when the UN turns 100? And what role do you see business in playing in terms of the work that they do with other stakeholders to help create that future? So if we can have maybe 30 seconds lightning round from each of you, we'll start a little bit randomly. So maybe with Madeep this time.
Thanks, Pratik. Well, that's a really big and important question, but I would say just we come down to three things, I think, which is the essence of the SDGs, really. To see a world that's just, that's equal, and that's sustainable, where people have equality of opportunity, where we are able to be good custodians of our planet, and where we also ensure that those who are committing violations, that they are held accountable. So I think that's really, really important. And let's create the conditions where justice, equality, and sustainability can be achieved. And for that, we really need effective systems, effective processes, and as been rightly said in the panel, partnerships based on understanding and mutual respect, and I dare say trust too.
Great. Thank you, Madeep. Andia, over to you.
I look forward to a world that is going to just do things because they make both good business sense, but they also make really good social sense. The amount of data that we have to use to persuade people just to believe in a cause is unacceptable. So I'm hoping that we'll have a world where justice itself will speak. It will speak for itself rather than the production of data.
Thank you, Andia. Giulia, over to you.
We, as you said to start, we at the Thomson Reuters Foundation, we would like a world where we won't have to advance media freedom, foster inclusive economy, and promote human rights. And where I think I echo what the previous speaker was saying, where equity, sustainability, and participation are core to business targets, not side activities of CSR departments. I think the good news is increasingly companies are going beyond compliance. Nearly 90% of the world's biggest companies are reporting under GRI. We have over 9,000 company part of your Global Compact. We have over 3,500 business that are now B Corp. But will COVID-19 accelerate this process or slow it down? We don't know yet. This is something we can't just wait and see, but we have the duty to push for business and government to build forward, as you said, better. And we can only do this by collaborating together and amplifying the message of the untold story we were talking about so that they are heard and then policy and business practice are implemented according to those stories, where at the core of those policies is justice and equality.
Great. Thank you, Giulia. Arindom, over to you next.
Just a one-line answer. In 2045, we want to see a world where we can put our hand on our heart and very confidently say that we are leaving a great planet for our children and grandchildren. It's as simple as that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Raina, let's end with you. Your generation is the future. What's your vision of business partnership in the world at UN 100?
So I would love to see a world where we no longer have to fight to prove that all people deserve equal rights and opportunities, and no longer have to fight to prove that climate change is real and deserves our attention. And I hope that by 2045, we'll be discussing and debating over solutions rather than whether the problems are worth addressing. That's the world that I would really love to see. And I hope that commonly we'll see leaders who are women, who are people of color, who are LGBTQ, refugees, differently abled, younger, and braver in challenging the barriers that we face today and creating that world that we want to leave behind for our children. And I know businesses will have a role to play there too by breaking from that norm and choosing those leaders, giving them chances, and also holding themselves accountable, just as we as citizens and governments and global institutions hold them accountable too. And just to conclude, I hope that we get the world that 16-year-old Raina wanted when I was filling out the World We Want survey that ended up informing the Sustainable Development Agenda. And I know we have a lot of work to do for that, but with energy like this, I think we are on track.
That's great. Thank you so much, Raina. Really, thank you all. That was an incredibly rich and inspiring and a quick 45 minutes. It flew by. I wish we had more time for discussion, but I think some really important insights emerging. I think it's clear that we're in unprecedented times and that COVID is forcing us all to adapt in new ways like this. I wish we could be in person in New York for this conversation, but it is what it is. I think we have a real opportunity in front of us to seize the moment and to do business differently so that we move towards a more regenerative and redistributive economy that protects us from future shocks, that prioritizes the rights and health and well-being of the most vulnerable. But I think doing so, as you all said, will require us to get a little bit uncomfortable, to break down the silos, to be a bit unconventional, and as Raina said, to start talking about solutions rather than debating whether problems exist. So we would love all of you who are listening to this conversation to join us on this journey. Please visit worldbenchmarkingalliance.org to learn more about the work that we're doing and how you can get involved in helping us to create that movement to help businesses create a better future, a more sustainable future, one in which business success is valued by what it contributes to society. And thank you all to our panelists. It's been a really great conversation, and really looking forward to seeing you all again virtually, or hopefully even better in person soon. So thanks once again. Thank you to the SDG Action Zone, and look forward to speaking soon.